There's a moment in every person's life when they catch a glimpse of something terrifying in the mirror. Not their reflection, but the stranger living behind their eyes. Carl Jung called this the shadow, and what he discovered about it would shake the very foundations of how we understand ourselves. Jung spent decades peering into the darkest corners of the human psyche, and what he found there was so disturbing, so revolutionary, that it challenges everything we believe about good and evil, light and darkness, ourselves and others. Picture this. You're driving home after a long day and someone cuts you off in traffic. For just a split second, you feel a surge of rage so intense it frightens you. You imagine swerving into their lane, teaching them a lesson. Then, just as quickly, you suppress it, horrified by your own thoughts. You tell yourself, "I'm not that kind of person." But Jung would whisper to you in that moment, "Oh, but you are. We all are." And that's the secret we spend our entire lives running from. The shadow isn't just anger or jealousy or hatred. It's every impulse, every thought, every desire we've deemed unacceptable. It's the repository of everything we've rejected about ourselves, everything we've pushed down into the basement of our consciousness. Jung discovered that we don't eliminate these aspects of ourselves by denying them. We feed them. In the darkness of our unconscious, they grow stronger, more twisted, more dangerous. Think of a child who's told repeatedly that anger is bad, that good children don't get angry. What happens to that anger? It doesn't disappear. It goes underground, where it ferments and transforms into something far more destructive than the original emotion ever was. The shadow contains not just our personal darkness, but the collective darkness of humanity itself. Jung realized that within each of us lives every human capacity. For creation and destruction, for love and hate, for healing and harm. This is why we're simultaneously fascinated and repulsed by stories of human cruelty. Part of us recognizes that capacity within ourselves, and it terrifies us into projection and denial. Jung observed something chilling about projection. We hate most in others what we refuse to acknowledge in ourselves. The person who disgusts you, who triggers your strongest reactions. They're showing you a part of your shadow you've successfully hidden, even from yourself. He wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But most people would rather live in comfortable delusion than face this uncomfortable truth." The darkest secret Jung uncovered isn't that we have a shadow. It's that our attempts to be purely good, purely light, purely positive create the very monsters we fear. When we split ourselves into acceptable and unacceptable parts, we create an internal civil war. The parts of us we reject don't disappear. They mutate into something far more dangerous than they ever were in their original form. Jung called this the phenomenon of enantiodromia. The tendency of things to transform into their opposite when taken to extremes. The person who tries desperately to be good often becomes unconsciously cruel. The one who preaches love loudest sometimes harbors the deepest hatred. Consider the religious fanatic who condemns others' sins while secretly indulging in the very behaviors they condemn. Or the peace activist whose inner rage is so suppressed it explodes in moments of self-righteous fury. This isn't hypocrisy in the traditional sense. It's the inevitable result of trying to be half a human being. Jung's most terrifying insight was that integration, not elimination, is the path to wholeness. We don't overcome our darkness by fighting it, so we transform it by acknowledging it, understanding it, and consciously choosing how to channel its energy. The shadow contains not just our capacity for destruction, but also our creative power, our passion, our vitality. When we reject it entirely, we become flat, lifeless, what Jung called mere fragments of who we could be. But integration doesn't mean acting on every dark impulse. It means becoming conscious of these impulses, understanding their origins, and choosing how to express their energy in constructive ways. A person who acknowledges their capacity for anger can channel that energy into fighting injustice. Someone who owns their manipulative tendencies can become masterful at persuasion, in service of good causes. Jung discovered that the people who cause the most harm are often those who believe themselves incapable of causing any harm at all. They're unconscious of their shadow and therefore at its mercy. Think about the most damaging people in your life. Were they consciously evil, or were they convinced they were doing good while unconsciously acting out their unintegrated darkness? The path to integration begins with what Jung called active imagination, consciously engaging with the rejected parts of ourselves through dreams, art, writing, or meditation. But this process requires tremendous courage. It means looking at the parts of ourselves we've spent years hiding from others and from ourselves. Jung knew that most people would choose comfortable unconsciousness over difficult awareness. He wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." Yet he also knew that this acceptance is the only path to genuine transformation, to becoming what he called individuated, a whole, conscious, integrated human being. The shadow work Jung prescribed isn't about becoming perfect, it's about becoming real. It's about trading the exhausting performance of false goodness for the authentic power of conscious choice. When we stop pretending to be saints and start learning to be wise humans, we paradoxically become far more capable of genuine goodness than we ever were in our split state. Jung observed that people who've done their shadow work are immediately recognizable. They have a quality of presence, of groundedness, of authentic power that those living in denial never possess. They're not trying to convince anyone of their goodness. They're too busy learning to navigate the full spectrum of their humanity with consciousness and skill. This integration also transforms how we see others. When we've owned our own darkness, we stop needing to project it onto others. We can see their humanity more clearly because we've learned to see our own. The person who triggers your strongest negative reactions stops being a monster and becomes a teacher, showing you exactly which aspects of your shadow still need attention. Jung's work reveals that judgment is often just projection in disguise. The traits we judge most harshly in others are usually the ones we judge most harshly in ourselves, and therefore suppress most deeply. But when we integrate our shadow, something miraculous happens. Compassion becomes natural, not forced. We understand human darkness because we've faced our own. This doesn't mean becoming passive or permissive. Someone who's integrated their shadow can set boundaries, say no, and even fight when necessary. But from a place of consciousness rather than unconscious reaction. They can access their aggression to protect what they love without being consumed by it. They can feel anger without being ruled by it. They can acknowledge selfish impulses without being enslaved by them. Jung discovered that the integrated person is far more capable of genuine love than the split person because they love from wholeness rather than need. When you're not spending all your energy suppressing parts of yourself, you have so much more energy available for creativity, connection, and contribution to the world. The shadow work Jung pioneered isn't comfortable, but it is liberating. It's the difference between being driven by unconscious forces and being guided by conscious choice. Most people live their entire lives without ever meeting themselves, the full spectrum of themselves. They die strangers to their own depths, having spent decades managing an image rather than developing substance. Jung's invitation is radical. What if you stopped running from yourself and started running toward yourself? What if you stopped trying to be perfect and started trying to be whole? This journey requires what he called moral courage, the willingness to face uncomfortable truths about yourself without immediately trying to fix, deny, or justify them. It means learning to hold paradox, to be simultaneously light and dark, good and flawed, wise and foolish, without needing to resolve the tension. The integrated person doesn't pretend to be above human nature. They learn to dance with it consciously. Jung understood that this work is not a luxury for the psychologically minded. It's a necessity for anyone who wants to live authentically and avoid unconsciously inflicting their unresolved darkness on others. Every relationship you have, every decision you make, every reaction you have is influenced by the degree to which you've integrated or rejected your shadow. The parent who denies their own childhood pain will unconsciously pass that pain to their children. The leader who refuses to acknowledge their power drives will abuse power unconsciously. But the person who has faced their darkness can love more fully, lead more wisely, and live more authentically than they ever could from a place of fragmented unconsciousness. Jung's darkest secret about human psychology is also his most hopeful. We are not doomed to be victims of our unconscious darkness. We can choose consciousness. We can choose integration. We can choose wholeness. The path isn't easy, but it's available to everyone willing to trade comfort for truth, image for authenticity, perfection for completion. This work doesn't end. It's a lifelong practice of staying conscious, staying curious, staying willing to see yourself as you really are rather than as you wish you were. But each step toward integration is a step toward freedom. Freedom from the exhausting performance of false perfection. Freedom from the unconscious repetition of destructive patterns. Freedom to choose your responses rather than being driven by unconscious reactions. Jung's legacy isn't just psychological theory. It's a roadmap to becoming fully human in a world that often rewards us for being partially human. The shadow will always be with us, but it doesn't have to control us. When we stop running from our darkness, we discover that it contains not just our capacity for destruction, but also our passion, our creativity, our power, and our depth. In embracing our full humanity, we discover what Jung knew all along. Wholeness is not the absence of darkness. It's the conscious integration of light and dark into something far more beautiful and powerful than either could ever be alone. The question isn't whether you have a shadow. You do. The question is whether you'll choose to remain unconscious of it or begin the courageous work of integration. Your shadow is waiting, patient and persistent in the depths of your being. It has been with you since birth, and it will be with you until death. The only choice you have is whether to meet it as an enemy or as a teacher. Jung knew that this choice determines not just your psychological health, but the quality of every relationship you'll ever have and every contribution you'll ever make to the world. The darkest secret about human psychology is also its greatest gift. We are far more than we pretend to be, and we are capable of far more than we dare to imagine, if we have the courage to face ourselves completely. In the end, Jung's work points to a simple but profound truth: the person you're trying so hard to be is preventing you from becoming who you really are. And who you really are is far more magnificent, far more powerful, and far more beautiful than the persona you've been wearing could ever be. If this message touched you, if it stirred something deep within your being, if it made you curious about the unexplored territories of your own soul, comment, "I choose my wholeness." Let this be your commitment to the journey of integration, to the courage of self-discovery, to the radical act of becoming authentically, completely, courageously yourself.